What's up, Archons? I'm Flightless Pheasant, and now that you're here, we can strap on our scuba suits, dive deep into the ocean, and try to find the grand mysteries that lie beneath without spiraling into madness in the process. But before we do, I'm a huge fan of KeyForge, and if you are too, then please like, subscribe, and hit the bell, as I'll be bringing you even more lore from KeyForge and the Crucible. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's time once again for another installment of my series, Houses of the Crucible. In this series, I dissect one of the houses that's part of the KeyForge lore. Each house is different, but they all work together with Archons to collect amber, forge keys, open vaults, and loot the treasures inside. Each house is unique, bringing with it its own design inspirations, membership requirements, hierarchy, ideals, technology, and uses for amber. And this series is about breaking it all down so that you too can appreciate the unique world that is the Crucible. Today we'll be talking about House Unfathomable. So, House Unfathomable is probably not called that by itself, but unfortunately I can't find any reference that tells me what they do call themselves, so we're just going to go with Unfathomable for this one. The design inspirations for House Unfathomable draw heavily on eldritch horror motifs, with tentacled monsters and unusual ocean creatures being common appearances in this house art. Additionally, you're going to see an awful lot of cultists and ritualists of various sorts that even Lovecraft himself would find abhorrent and unusual. Mechanically, House Unfathomable's primary focus seems to be on disruption mechanics. In particular, they like to exhaust creatures, put them back in their owner's hand, or do things like discard cards out of your opponent's hand, or take a peek at the things that they might have preparing for you later. These mechanics are meant to imitate the idea that they're messing with your mind and manipulating your creatures in order to cause them to act in unpredictable or unhelpful ways. The membership of House Unfathomable is drawn exclusively from a sentient species on the Crucible referred to as Aquans. Aquans are fish-humanoid hybrids, though some of them are much more fish than humanoid, as they can draw from all sorts of different fish subgroups, like jellyfish, or octopi, or even crab-like creatures, and combine those with more human traits to make an Aquan. Aside from the Aquans, the only other members of House Unfathomable are a number of sea creatures that they use as beasts of burden. Some of these are just normal fish, some of them have mind-altering powers, and some of them look more like beasts of war, or are used as just big monsters that cause havoc in their wake. Because nearly everything we know about House Unfathomable is actually given to us from the perspective of land dwellers, we actually have a very poor idea of what their hierarchy looks like. We do know that they must have some kind of hierarchy because they have policing agents and they have enforcers of different sorts, and we know that religion is very close to the center of their hierarchy as they have a number of priests and other religious figures who are prominent in multiple card arts and across various flavor texts. But beyond this, we don't really know much about how that hierarchy is structured. We do know, however, that a good chunk of them are cultists who serve a number of dark gods. We've been able to infer a few of those gods by just sort of going through the various card arts and flavor texts, and actually, I've managed to put together what I think are probably the 4 gods that we have names for right now. The first is Kilagog. Kilagog is found on Call of the Void, Kilagog's Trench, and Offering to Kilagog. Kilagog seems to be some kind of being that dwells in the deep ocean trenches and that likes to feed on the living or on sacrifices that are brought to it. We also know Rakuzel is another one, found on Rakuzel's Chant and Voice of Rakuzel. Rakuzel seems to be more interested in the push and pull of the tides and to have something to do with the flow of tidal water. We also have Sobog, found on Sobog's Thingamabob, who seems to be a more chaotic force that just causes general unrest and anarchy. And the last one is Meloruk, from Effigy of Meloruk. This one seems to be some kind of really powerful being, as even its effigy manifests as a 100 power, 100 armor creature. House Unfathomable has no current official leader, but their dark gods likely fill the role of leader. Although it's possible in the future we might see a high priest or something like that get the role of leader as they try to bring about the resurrection of these dark gods. We've sort of danced around it already, but the ideals of House Unfathomable seem to center around isolationism and indoctrination into a cult-like mentality that centers around releasing their dark gods from various seals and vaults that they've been trapped in for untold eons in order to prevent an apocalypse where the Unfathomable will bring their dark gods to the surface and flood the world. Doesn't sound great for anyone else, and honestly, I feel like if their plan worked out, it would kind of be the end of the local group, so I guess we should all keep our fingers crossed that they're never successful. Most of the technology of House Unfathomable seems pretty rudimentary. They use a lot of tridents and nets and other things woven from reeds and kelp. However, they do also seem to have technologies that can manipulate memories and nightmares in order to mess with the minds of their enemies. And they also have technology that's fairly advanced, including like bubble guns that can be used to encapsulate enemies and trap them in prisons that float around, keeping them from being useful in future fights. As well as some things we might recognize, like submarines and torpedoes that they likely use in addition to their more primitive weaponry. When it comes to unique uses for Amber, Unfathomable's primary use of Amber is to unlock the various vaults that have sealed up their dark gods. While we've never seen them succeed in unlocking an actual god, we have seen them unlock a number of very powerful creatures, such as Tangeka and Thing from the Deep, both of which are mighty beasts unto themselves and boggle our minds on just how strong their actual gods would be were they able to release them. In addition to this, they do seem to be able to use Amber in order to manipulate the ocean and the tides to their advantage, and to cause freezing effects or other mind-altering abilities that seem to be Amber-based. Much of this is a fairly unique application, although most other houses wouldn't really have too much use for creating ice or raising tides. Given their extreme isolationist nature, you'd think that House Unfathomable would have very strained relations with most of the other houses on the Crucible. And broadly, you'd be right. Sanctum and Mars, in particular, seem to not get along with them very well, and they're at odds with Brobnar near constantly. But somewhat surprisingly, they actually do have a few positive relationships from time to time. Star Alliance and Aquidon have both reached out to them in order to create friendly relationships, and actually, even though Sanctum is often at odds with them, they too have found a common ground in their shared religious zealotry. So, Unfathomable isn't completely antagonistic, but I think their overall goal sets them at odds with just about everyone else, and so eventually you kinda have to just say, we have to be enemies, because your goal just doesn't work for me. In spite of having been around since the Fantasy Flight days, House Unfathomable is still a bit obscure, which makes knowing too much about them very difficult. But I did try to dig in as much as I could to find the interesting bits, and I do like their sort of eldritch horror theme, and I think that the information about them being kind of scattered and hard to collect really does sort of add to that concept. So, for once, I'm actually not too upset to be a little short on lore resources to draw on. I do definitely like their sort of dark god motif, and I'm a big fan of the way that their technology looks and works, and I'm also just very interested in the ways that they use Amber being fairly unique, even though most other houses probably wouldn't find a similar use. So, is there anything in here that you thought was particularly interesting? Any lore bits that I missed? Any conversations you want to have about House Unfathomable? Go ahead and put them down in the comments, and come along with me next time when we are going to be spending our time bushwhacking through the wilds and discovering what witches' brews might do to the creatures found outside of the populated areas of the Crucible. Until then, I'm Flightless Pheasant, and this has been Houses of the Crucible. Until next time, later, Archons.